What happens when a royal couple, known for commanding headlines, collides with a host whose specialty is exposing contradictions with a sly grin? The Graham Norton show was buzzing that evening like it hadn't in years. The signature red sofa gleamed beneath the stage lights. The audience murmured with anticipation, and camera operators exchanged quick nods as though they knew something special was about to unfold. The word had spread fast. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were in the building. When Graham Norton finally stepped onto the stage, the crowd roared. He soaked in the applause with his trademark grin and a cheeky wave before taking a seat at the desk. "We've had Hollywood stars, we've had pop legends, we've even had prime ministers," he teased. "But tonight we have royalty. Please welcome Meghan Markle and Prince Harry." The cheer that followed was deafening. Meghan emerged first, radiant in an elegant emerald dress that shimmered under the lights. Harry followed, sharp in a navy suit, his jaw set in that practiced but uneasy smile he'd worn countless times before. Together they waved and shook hands with Graham, then settled on the far side of the sofa. The camera zoomed in, capturing every detail. Meghan's carefully poised expression, Harry's steady but tight posture, and Graham's mischievous glint as he shuffled his cards. At first, the conversation was smooth. Graham asked about Meghan's charity work, her podcast, and the couple's recent move to California. Harry chimed in with measured anecdotes about veterans' projects and mental health advocacy. The audience clapped politely, laughed at light jokes, and everything seemed to flow like any other harmless celebrity interview. But Graham Norton wasn't known for harmless. His grin widened, and the questions sharpened like knives wrapped in velvet. "So," he began, tilting his head, "you two stepped back from the royal family? Or was it stepping away or stepping out? I do lose track." The audience chuckled awkwardly. Harry's jaw twitched, but he forced a smile. "We simply wanted to focus on family and our own work. That's all." "Of course," Graham replied smoothly, "but you must admit, to the rest of us, it looked a bit like running away. One day royalty, the next, a Netflix deal in California. Was that always the plan?" The laughter that followed wasn't unanimous. A few gasps rippled through the crowd. Meghan's smile faltered, Harry's expression hardened. "It's not running away," Harry shot back, his tone sharper now. "If you're leaving something toxic behind." The word hung in the air. Graham leaned forward, eyes glittering. "Toxic," he echoed. "That's a word we've heard a lot from you both. About the press, about the palace. Is there anything about royal life you did enjoy?" Meghan shifted uncomfortably. Harry's arms crossed over his chest. The atmosphere shifted. The playful energy drained from the room, replaced by a prickling tension that made even the stage lights feel hotter. The audience sensed it, holding their breath. And then came the spark. Graham turned to Meghan, his tone deceptively light. "Some say you never really fit in with the royal family, that perhaps you went in knowing you wouldn't. Some even whisper you had an agenda." The temperature dropped. Meghan's eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into a line. "That's nonsense," she said firmly, her American accent crisp in the silence. "And frankly, that's an insulting question." "Oh, no offense meant," Graham countered, raising his palms innocently. "I'm only asking what's already out there. The people at home want to hear your response." "Maybe the people at home," Harry cut in coldly, "should stop listening to nonsense from people who don't know what they're talking about." The audience murmured, restless now. The energy was no longer fun. It was dangerous, unpredictable. And Graham, sensing the powder keg in front of him, only leaned in further. "Well," he said with a sly smile, "you've made it clear you want to tell your own story, Harry. But here you are, on my show in front of millions, promoting books and documentaries. Isn't it all rather public, considering how much you insist on privacy?" The crowd gasped softly. Meghan's expression hardened. Harry's lips curled into a tight line. For the first time that night, the thin mask of royal composure cracked. And that was only the beginning. The air in the studio had shifted. Gone was the playful banter and light laughter that usually defined Graham Norton's show. Instead, an uneasy silence lingered, heavy with the weight of questions and unspoken accusations. Cameras zoomed in tighter, capturing every flicker in Meghan's eyes, every twitch in Harry's jaw. Harry leaned forward, his voice taut. There's a very big difference between telling your own story and letting tabloids twist it into something ugly. Graham nodded, lips curled into a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Of course, of course. But don't you see how it looks contradictory? You asked for privacy, yet here you are again, telling your story to the world. Doesn't that, perhaps, invite even more scrutiny? The audience murmured nervously. Meghan inhaled sharply and adjusted the hem of her dress, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the armrest. Harry's eyes narrowed, his voice louder now. What it invites is honesty. What it demands is perspective. Something the press, and clearly some hosts, are sorely lacking. The audience gasped, caught between admiration for Harry's boldness and discomfort at the confrontation. Graham didn't blink. He tilted his head, tapping his cue cards against his desk with slow, deliberate precision. So we're the problem then? He asked, his voice deceptively calm. Harry gave a bitter laugh. If the shoe fits, Graham. That was when Graham struck harder, turning his gaze toward Meghan. Many people have said that Meghan was never really supported by the royal family, but others argue it wasn't about background or race, it was about behavior. Do you think it's entirely fair to paint all criticism as racism? The studio froze. Meghan's eyes widened for half a second, then narrowed into steel. Harry sat bolt upright, his hand tightening into a fist on his knee. Excuse me? His tone was ice. It's just a question, Graham said smoothly. Some feel you've used accusations of racism as a shield, dismissing legitimate criticism. The audience let out a collective gasp. Meghan's voice cut through the silence, sharp and deliberate. That's dangerous rhetoric, and I'm not going to sit here and let you normalize it. Harry leaned forward, nearly out of his seat now. You're walking a fine line, Graham, a very fine line. But Graham wasn't backing down. He leaned in too, his tone sharper now. I ask what millions are already thinking. If those questions upset you, perhaps it says more about your answers than it does about me. The tension was unbearable. The other guests on the sofa had shrunk into shadows, their polite smiles frozen, their bodies angled away as though physical distance might shield them from the firestorm. Harry's breathing grew heavier. His voice rose, cutting through the stunned silence. This isn't journalism. This isn't entertainment. This is you turning people into spectacles to boost your ratings. You sit there with your smirk, with your cards, pretending it's all harmless fun. But it's cruelty dressed as wit. For the first time, Graham's smile faltered. His voice dropped lower, colder. And you, Harry, think suffering puts you beyond reproach. But you came here, you sat in that chair. No one forced you. The words struck like a blade. Harry's face flushed, his lips pressed into a tight, trembling line. Meghan reached for his arm, whispering something under her breath. But he pulled away, his eyes blazing. The audience sat frozen, every second stretching like an eternity. And then Graham twisted the knife. You've invoked your mother's name countless times to support your narrative, he said softly. Yet when someone else mentions her, suddenly it's off limits. Isn't that a double standard? Harry shot to his feet. The sound of the sofa creaking under his sudden movement startled even the cameraman. His face was crimson, his voice thunderous. Don't you dare bring my mother into this! Don't you dare! The eruption echoed across the studio. Meghan stood too, instinctively rising with him. Her face pale, but her chin lifted defiantly. The audience gasped, some covering their mouths, others clutching at their seats. Graham leaned back slightly, but his eyes remained locked on Harry. You came here asking to be heard, yet when the questions get difficult, you lash out. Is that what you call honesty? Harry's chest heaved, his fists clenched at his sides. Meghan placed a steadying hand on his arm, but his glare was fixed on Graham, fury radiating from every line of his body. The studio lights seemed hotter, brighter, as if the very air was suffocating. The cameras captured it all. The trembling in Harry's hands, the icy determination in Meghan's gaze, and the cool, unflinching stare of Graham Norton, who sat unmoving, his cards resting calmly in his hands. The stage had become a battlefield, and neither side was willing to yield. And in the next moment, the clash would reach its breaking point. The studio was silent, every breath held captive by the tension radiating between Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and Graham Norton. The camera zoomed in, framing Harry's rigid stance and Meghan's protective presence beside him. The red sofa, once a symbol of lighthearted celebrity charm, now looked like a battlefield drenched in the heat of confrontation. Harry's voice was low but venomous, each word slicing through the quiet. "You think this is entertainment, Graham? You think people's lives, my family, my wife, are just material for your smirks and your cheap laughs?" Graham didn't flinch. His eyes glinted under the lights as he leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "I think this is a conversation, Harry, the kind millions deserve to hear. You came here willingly. If you're uncomfortable, perhaps it's not the questions but the truths behind them that unsettle you." The audience murmured nervously. Meghan's expression hardened. She raised her chin and fixed Graham with a glare that could cut glass. "You've crossed the line tonight," she said firmly. "This isn't curiosity, it's cruelty." A ripple of gasps coursed through the crowd. Graham, however, only tilted his head. "Cruelty?" he echoed. "Or accountability? Because there's a difference, that." That was it. The last straw. Harry's voice cracked into a roar. "Accountability? You want accountability? You're nothing more than a parasite with a microphone. You drag people here, pretend to welcome them, then tear them apart for sport. And you call it journalism." The words hung in the air like thunder. The audience froze, some wide-eyed, some glancing at one another in disbelief. The other guests on the sofa shrank further into their seats, visibly desperate to vanish. Graham's smile finally slipped, replaced by a cool, hard stare. His reply was a dagger wrapped in velvet. "Maybe, well," he said softly, "you should ask yourself why you feel so small here, Harry." The line landed like a hammer. Harry's fists clenched, his knuckles white, his face twisted with fury as he leaned across the desk, voice dropping to a venomous whisper that still carried through the microphones. "You don't deserve this chair. You don't deserve to speak about me, about my wife, about my family. You're nothing but a bully dressed as a host." The audience gasped again, louder this time, the tension now unbearable. For the first time, Meghan took a step forward, her hand firmly gripping Harry's arm. "We're done here," she said, her tone cold and final. "This isn't a conversation. It's a spectacle, and we won't be part of it." Harry slammed his microphone down on the desk, the sound echoing like a gunshot. The audience jumped, several gasping aloud. With a swift movement, he turned toward the audience, his voice booming across the studio. "And you," he thundered, gesturing at the rows of stunned faces, "you sit here and laugh while he tears people to shreds. Do you feel proud of yourselves? Is this entertainment to you?" Not a single person replied. The silence was suffocating. Meghan tugged his arm, urging him toward the exit, her own glare sweeping across the room. "You are everything wrong with this world," Harry spat, turning back to Graham one last time. "You dress up cruelty as wit and call it a job, but all you are is pathetic. This show is pathetic." And with that, he stormed toward the studio doors, Meghan at his side, her emerald dress sweeping dramatically behind her as cameras tracked their every step. The slam of the door reverberated like an explosion, leaving behind only stunned silence. For a long, unbearable moment, nobody moved. Graham remained seated, his hands resting calmly on his desk, though the flicker in his eyes betrayed the storm inside. Finally, he let out a slow breath, straightened his jacket, and looked back at the cameras. "Well," he said dryly, his trademark wit creeping back into his voice, "that escalated quickly." The audience released nervous laughter, a shaky attempt to break the tension. Graham raised a hand to quiet them, his tone suddenly serious. "Look," he began, glancing at the audience before locking eyes with the camera, "I've hosted this show for many years. I've had everyone on this sofa, actors, musicians, politicians, saints, and sinners. And yes, sometimes the questions are easy and sometimes they're hard, but they are questions the public deserves to hear answered." He tapped his cue cards lightly on the desk. "That is not bullying. That is not cruelty. That is conversation. And if some guests cannot handle that, perhaps they should not agree to sit in this chair." The crowd broke into tentative applause, stronger now as Graham continued. I have sympathy for Prince Harry, for everything he endured as a boy, but sympathy does not exempt anyone from scrutiny, not when they voluntarily step into the spotlight. His eyes narrowed slightly, his voice steady and sharp. What you just saw was not cruelty from me. It was a man so determined to control the narrative that he couldn't stand being asked simple questions about it. The audience clapped louder this time. Graham let the applause rise before softening his tone. To Harry and Meghan, if you're watching this later, I wish you peace. But don't mistake questions for attacks, because the truth has a way of coming out, whether you like it or not. He straightened his jacket once more, that sly grin returning just enough to reassure his audience. And that, ladies and gentlemen, he concluded, was Prince Harry and Meghan Markle for about 20 minutes. The studio erupted in uneasy laughter and applause. The red sofa, now half empty, gleamed under the lights as Graham shuffled his cards, moving briskly to the next segment as if nothing had happened. But for everyone watching, live in the studio and across millions of homes, it was clear this night would not be remembered for the jokes or the glamour or the charm. It would be remembered as the night Meghan Markle and Prince Harry stood up live on air and stormed out in fury.